Tony Brown's Journal may have been the first national television series to inform the nation of its bloodiest race riot. It happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. For nearly 80 years, a massacre of blacks was, according to the New York Times, and I quote, never publicly discussed in Tulsa, nor mentioned in classrooms or textbooks. Many residents had no idea that whites burned the city's once prosperous black community to the ground. End of quote. Whites hunted down and slaughtered hundreds of blacks, burned 1,000 black homes, and decimated one of the most prosperous business developments in the United States. The Negro Wall Street, it was called. It was a shameful American version of ethnic cleansing, one white man in Tulsa said. And the killing and looting earned Tulsa the distinction of being the first U.S. city to be bombed from the air, referring to the use of Curtiss JN-4 Jennies to drop incendiary materials, Molotov cocktails, onto black homes. In 1997, the Tulsa Race Riot Commission was formed by the Oklahoma legislature, overcoming a conspiracy that had kept the truth out of the school history books and a nation ignorant of its violent racist past, especially the inflammatory period between 1919 and 1921, and of the prosperity that blacks enjoyed when given the opportunity to compete. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, reparations for the Tulsa race riot.
At that time, down on Greenwood, you could buy anything you wanted. Anything. clothes, shoes. They had theaters and everything, and it was pretty. And they had lots of customers and things. I was a little nosy kid, and I was just looking, see what all I could see.
The whole evolution of how Tulsa got to be the Greenwood district and blacks settling in. First of all, Tulsa, Oklahoma was the oil capital of the world. They had so much money changing hands long before we dealt business in the Middle East. Tulsa, Oklahoma was the heartbeat of the oil capital of the United States. So as a result of rich corporate America, you had an influx of so many blacks being able to have domesticated work. As a result of the domestics being hired, the physicians, the attorneys, the doctors, the lawyers. And the bottom line was segregation was such a monster in Oklahoma. Oklahoma went from having all these black towns, strong black business districts. In 1915, segregation got so bad you had separate telephone booths in Oklahoma. Only place in the United States that had ever transpired.
The all-black community in Tulsa in the early 1900s had produced some of the richest black families in America. Its financial district was so prosperous that in 1913, it was referred to as the Negro Wall Street. Blacks owned a substantial portion of the land and independently operated their own businesses, hospitals, banks, and schools. On May 31st, 1921, Tulsa was literally torn apart by racial hatred, resulting in one of the worst race riots in the United States history. The facts of this story are debatable, and an obvious attempt to hide them is evident. According to some whites, the riot was sparked by the alleged sexual attack of a white woman by a 19-year-old shoeshine boy named Dick Rowland in an elevator in downtown Tulsa. However, many blacks believed Rowland's version, that he merely stepped on the woman's foot. Subsequently, the charges were dropped, but not before news of the alleged attack gave a mob of angry whites the opportunity that they had been waiting for ever since blacks began to prosper in Tulsa, a chance to destroy the thriving black community of Greenwood. A headline in the Tulsa Tribune read, "To lynch Negro tonight." All copies of that article have since mysteriously been removed. As the race riot broke out, the white mob raced through the streets with high-powered weapons, hunting down blacks. They crossed the tracks into Tulsa's black district and began to loot and burn every building in sight. The mob focused on robbing and burning black businesses and homes. By the next morning, Tulsans awoke to the sight of the 36-block section of Greenwood in full blaze. 5 black men were seen trapped in one of the burning houses. When one of them tried to escape the flames, he was shot and his body thrown back into the house. Though it never entered the official report, many of Tulsa's black victims said they saw an airplane drop what appeared to be firebombs on the buildings in the black community. Others recalled being shot at from the air.
I was coming down Greenwood, and the bullet hit right on the floor, down the pavement.
An airplane came and dropped. I guess we would call them firebombs now, gasoline in jugs and set them afire, So that's how the blacks were driven out of Greenwood.
This incident put Tulsa in the history books as the first American city to be bombed from the air. The official death count was 36. But it has been estimated to be as high as 300. Oklahoma State Representative Don Ross represents District 73, which includes the Greenwood area. In 1997, he introduced the bill that created the 1921 Tulsa Race Riot Commission.
Surrounded by the realities of racism and segregation, 35 square blocks of the Black Wall Street of America were destroyed. The community, when the state police came to Tulsa, they only arrested black folks. They left the rioters, they left the looters, they left the murderers to rampage my community. More than that, the sheriff deputized the mob at the courthouse. So they were able to loot, burn, and murder under the color of law. So when you have survivors living and you have descendants who have suffered, when rioters were acting under the color of law, I think reparations are an appropriate subject to be discussed. We'll never know the number of dead. I think it may be less than 300 and more than an official count of 100. But funerals were banned at the time. Even the National Guard said when they arrived on the scenes, white vigilantes were carting blacks off. The historical, the oral history of my community suggested they were buried in dams along the Arkansas River or thrown in the river and in pits. We don't know. We do not know. But those incidents alone would suggest that the number is greater than the 100 that were killed. And then there are records of people who were not a part of the official count who died later after the riot.
Representative Ross is extending the life of the commission to complete its investigation.
The preliminary report that you've read about should, in effect, be discarded because all it did was meet the technical aspects of the law. There was a deadline that the report should be before the legislature by February 1. The research was not concluded, so it required a report and a recommendation on reparations. So the 1921 Race Riot Committee met the technical aspect of the law. It also has provisions for a $5 million memorial. That memorial has nothing to do with reparations. It's just out of plain decency. The reparations are another issue that will be discussed when the final report is drafted and forwarded to the legislature. I first heard about the 1921 race riot from our good friend W.D. Williams, my teacher, when I was 15. So it's been a 44-year search for me to place this on the national forum. I certainly had people who assisted me along the way, notably Dr. John Hope Franklin, who headed the President's Commission on Racial Relations. Dr. John Hope Franklin is from Tulsa, and his father, B.C. Franklin, was one of the real heroes of the race riot. Not only was Tulsa, the black community in Tulsa, the first American city to be bombed from the air, it was the first city bombed from the air. When I was in Chicago last week, some survivors came to a public hearing, refugees from Tulsa riot, and a lady, 88, who was blind, stood up and talked about bombs, stepping over dead people, bombs been dropped from airplanes, stepping over dead people, and her parents had been taken to concentration camps, and that it took 3 days to find her parents. Now, there are some similarities in the Holocaust in Tulsa. There are some similarities in Waco in Tulsa. There are some similarities of the Japanese placed in concentration camps. But Tulsa was 500 Wacos. Tulsa was half as large as the incarceration of Japanese American. Tulsa was a mini Hiroshima, the worst chapter in American history, in the largest civil disaster since the Civil War.
Yes, my father was, Ed Goodwin Sr. was a senior in high school, and his sister, my aunt, Anna Carroll, who subsequently worked with the Red Cross, were both there during the riot, as well as my grandfather, who was very light-skinned, could pass for white, and he was able to save his house from burning because he stood in front of it as they hid under the beds there. And the story's been repeated many times about the riot, and I heard my father say about how they dropped the firebombs as they just described there from air, And there are a lot of other information that's come about in recent years, but really one of the biggest contributors to that riot was the daily paper there. And they had some inflammatory editorials that we have privy to and they required black people to carry green cards, and they put them on curfew after the riot, and they wouldn't sell them lumber to build back, and they had to build back out of the best that they could with orange crates and just substandard material.
My mother looked out the front door of our home and saw 4 white men carrying torches coming up the sidewalk of our house. My mother looked out the front door and she saw them and she says, "You kids get up under the bed. Get up under the bed, and I mean right now." The fire started. They went back out, and as they were passing by the bed, I had my hand out from under the bed when I was the last one, and they stepped on my hand. One stepped on my hand, and my sister put her hand over my mouth to keep me from screaming because they didn't know we were under the bed. But I remember the 2 of us running down the streets, and guns were firing and fires, everything was on fire.
It was a lot of ruckus going, a lot of noise going, a lot of shooting going. It was fighting, shooting going on. And the people my mother worked for came down and got us that night and carried us to their house. It was so bad you could hear people hollering, and they had to be heard. And I'd ask my mother, "What's that noise, Mother?" And she said, "Get yourself in here. I told you to stop looking out there." And soon as their backs would turn, I would look again. I just thought that they were killing people and putting them on trucks, getting them out the way. That's the only thing I could think. Because, you don't put live people and stack them up. It's only dead people.
There is a new and ironic twist in this case. New evidence indicates that some whites painted their faces to get into the Greenwood area undetected and inadvertently were killed by the white mob.
And I could hear the people say that they were throwing some of them in holes, some of them in the river, in different places, to get rid of the bodies. And there was quite a few of them painted their faces black.
I actually heard bullets whoop, right across my head and hit the grass. I said, "Ooh-wee, oh, thank the Lord."
Otis Clark was 18 years old at the time of the riot.
We were on the front line. See, on the south side of the Frisco track divided the colored from the whites. Ben was had come across from the south side and come on the tracks.
That's where they came?
And that cut me off from my home. We were trying to get an ambulance out of the back of the Jackson's fuel home, and men shot over there while the boy was trying to unlock the door to get the ambulance out. Bullets hit him in the hand, and blood jumped out his hand. He had to drop the keys, and I'm standing right back behind him. The Talbots lived right on this side of the track, and they had a home there, but it was missing, and I didn't see them no more. What happened to the Talbots? I haven't heard no more from them. We don't know what happened to them. And my stepfather, too. Didn't see him no more. They just got killed in the deal. That's all to that. We didn't see him no more. Nobody had no fuels or nothing. We just didn't see those folks no more. At that particular time, they didn't do anything for us. They didn't give us nothing. They didn't try to help us get the Red Cross came in and built some little shanties. Built one for my mother and built one for my grandmother.
When blacks tried to rebuild their business community, the Tulsa Chamber of Commerce tried everything within its power to stop them. blacks were refused financial assistance, and all donations from outsiders were turned down. In addition, a fire ordinance was passed which prevented many blacks from rebuilding their homes. Later, Walter White of the NAACP reported that the ordinance was passed to allow a group of white businessmen who had been trying to buy the Greenwood land for years to purchase it at a cheap price and turn it into an industrial complex. During that winter, more than 1,000 blacks were forced to live in tents. Against these tremendous odds, however, blacks rebuilt Greenwood.
The real challenge, or the real issue, among many others, with the 1921 race riot, Booker T. Washington declared the black community of Tulsa as the Black Wall Street of America. It was a wealthy city. And what happened is that the riot halted the wealth, the accumulation of wealth. Blacks were cut off from loans. The city made a commitment, a restitution, reparations, if you will, to the dime. And then they reneged on it and went into, then developed an attempt to steal the land. That rather than reparations, what they in fact did is pass a city ordinance after the riot that said blacks could not rebuild on property that had been burned, which would have been largely the black community. And what they said in the official documents is what we would do is move the blacks, niggers, further north, and when we sell their property, we'll give them the difference in what the property is worth, and that will be their restitution. Of the more than $4 million in claims that were placed before the City Commission of Tulsa at the time, all 4 million were turned down. Yet, McGee, there were 2 pawn shops, white pawn shops that were broken in by the looters. They petitioned the City Commission for ammunition and guns that were lost during the 1921 race riot, something a total of some $5,000. The City Commission paid those claims. So in my view, by paying those claims, it justified and it, in fact, endorsed reparations for all those who lost something. There were whites who lost their lives. There were white property owners in that community who lost property. Matter of fact, much of the historical information on the race riot came from a case in the state Supreme Court. Renfro, a white man, sued to force the insurance companies to pay him for his property that was lost in a riot. See, even blacks and whites who had insurance were not paid by the insurance companies because they had a riot restriction in the insurance clause. And when this was determined a riot by the courts, all those insurance claims were denied. So the most celebrated case on this issue was a white man. So I don't, I wish we'd get away from the word reparations in this instance, restitution, compensation, I don't care. But whites want to see this as a black issue. Tulsa, as I said, had integrated warfare where black lives were lost and white property also was equally lost. So I think there are whites who got money coming.
Well, wouldn't make all that right, but after all, it would be an idea of giving some kind of restitution for us losing so much.
Someone came into your home and set it afire and burned up everything that you owned, including your home and everything around you. And we didn't get a penny's insurance, even though we had our property insured. How would you feel about reparations? Something. I never thought of it, how much somebody should pay for what they put my family through.
My personal viewpoint, I'd like to see every survivor, all 64, get some monetary reparations. I'd also like to see some kind of scholarship fund set up for descendants of survivors. We know they were summarily buried and that it was not done properly. There was no closure. There are people, I talk to survivors to this day, who weep because they don't know where their relatives are. It's getting over it and moving on.
A white mob destroyed the black community, an evil of which neither community has survived. I'm hoping that as we begin to discuss a reconciliation monument, as we wade through the issues of reparation, it will pull our community together. There was a poll taken that said 57% of Oklahomans were against reparation. Well, for me, that was a good sign. Being an elected official, if I entered the race as an unknown, as many of the people did, are really not aware of the riot, and I had 43% of the vote without information, I would think I had a hardy chance. I believe it's a compelling report of the events of the Tulsa race riot. And really, it wasn't a race riot, it was interracial warfare. If there's a compelling story told, then I think the whole notion of reparations, the whole discussion may change. It was interesting in a vote on Wednesday of last week, the issue of reparation did come up to vote. It survived the bill by one vote. So the discussion, I would say, is let this discussion begin, let the discussion continue. When we look at Tulsa, it is unique in terms of race riots. Now, please know that Tulsa was not the only race riot. It happens to be the largest one and had more deaths, an estimated 300 people to die. From 1906 in Atlanta to the 40s in Detroit, there were more than 50 riots. And I see something happening through this experience in Tulsa. I just left Illinois, where Representative Young and Senator Tanner of the Illinois General Assembly are fashioning a bill for reparations, or at least a study of the 4 riots that they had in Illinois. Illinois is second, had the second number of race riots, second only to Texas in the number of race riots that it had. In terms of the reparation movement, I have talked to Randall Robinson, and I have talked to INCASA, the grassroots movement supporting Representative John Conye's bill. And I think there's general agreement that this whole study of the Tulsa race riot is healthy. And it's not only healthy for those communities, it is healthy for the nation. I think, I have to believe that if this nation sees the savagery that is perpetuated on black folks over the years, that it may respond pretty much as they did when they turned the dogs and fire hoses on Birmingham. So I certainly encourage these studies on the race riots in some of the 40 cities. I've been traveling all over the country speaking to that issue.